What if we could learn from outstanding leaders in business, sports, and education from some of the best voices in corporate America? Lighting the Path is a series of interviews with industry leaders whose stories highlight strategies that build purpose-driven cultures, engage and retain top talent, develop drivers that create high-performance teams, and connect people to the vision of your company. Join us to hear from game-changing, talented leaders whose paths make a difference at work and at home.
I often talk about how we can be kind instead of being nice. Because if we're only being nice and telling the sunny side of everything, um, we're really avoiding conflict. We're often trying to be liked. Whereas somebody that is really being kind has an intent and impact and an approach that's focused on the long term well being and the growth, both of themselves, of the team, and the business outcomes that we're trying to get together and do. That's the heart of being in business, right? So kindness comes from that genuine place of care and respect. And if you don't have tension, that means something's being unsaid. People are just being nice, but tension can have a positivity that's going to propel things forward. Tension is there in excitement, tension is there in innovation, tension is there in growth.
Mhm.
Without tension, we're actually stagnant.
Yeah, very much so. It's because that's the muscle gets developed, right? And then I'm, I was going to say you can't tell that I'm a weightlifter, and the reason why you can't is because I'm not. I mean, there's nothing there. But I can't make this arm stronger unless I put pressure on it, build that muscle up, and that's what tension does for us. But there's a difference between productive tension and destructive tension.
100%.
Right. And so what do I have to do as a leader to be able to step into that place and be able to manage that where that delta is?
And this is where being a kind leader rooted in courage and care, right?
Mm.
Prioritizing what's truly beneficial for the individuals and the whole team in order to achieve the outcomes that you're being held accountable for and what you need to be holding them accountable for. And a kind leader might not always seem nice, but their actions foster meaningful relationships and sustainable success. So they're going to give the candidate timely feedback that's constructive. They're also going to acknowledge creativity and, ooh, you're being scrappy, you're doing something a little different here. They are just genuinely interested in achieving the results, but in a way that is sustainable. And running people over or command and control or telling people what to do alienates in the short and long term.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can have the courage to truly be kind, which is often sometimes having to tell people what they don't want to hear in order for everyone to achieve what we want, then you're going to be more successful.
Yeah, right. So I remember I was interviewing a guest and we used the word love in a corporate setting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it said it in the message. And matter of fact, two of them actually talked about it. But Joyce Russell, who's the president of the U.S. Arm of ADECO, largest staffing group in the world, talked about if I truly love my people, which she goes, that's my mandate, then I have to be willing to provide feedback and give information that will help them grow and develop and become. If I don't, I can't express that. And it's a key aspect of her leadership process.
Yeah, at Microsoft, the manager expectations is model coach care. And a lot of folks were like, what does care mean?
Mm-hmm.
And care is really centered in this kind leadership. It's being courageous to look and foster growth um, with empathy, compassion, yet strong accountability.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And so if you look at this, especially because of, and I was headed toward Microsoft because that's a behemoth that you're
mhm.
trying to move because of its global reach. Um, is there a time that there's a project, a situation, something that you were trying to wrestle with that you had to uh, push forward, that you were, I call it, caught in the sand traps. You were caught, it was just, there was challenges and issues that you're having to deal with, that you had to figure out a way to get people to bring clarity to the results and the steps that need to be taken. And it was a difficult thing for you to bang your head into.
Um, I would say it was my challenge as well as many. My role was in sales readiness and then learning and development and focusing on sales manager capabilities in particular. And the shift when Satya Nadella came into leadership as CEO of moving from a know it all to learn it all culture. This is where he brought outside in knowledge with Carol Dweck. He could have stayed it inside, but he was a longtime Microsoftie as well. So this going from transactional to relationship based selling, it was a multi-year slog. It was, over the course of a decade, things had to move from filling in how many licenses do you want this year, customer, to here's the type of solutions that we need. And it was in anticipation of what back in the day was called the cloud, which is everything's the cloud these days. We
That's
don't use
right.
those terms, right? But what was the mindset of it is how we get things done. This was that cultural change. And those that were used to being in command and control to the point where, you're sending messages to each other so that you make sure everybody in the meeting has the same exact message. That is part of corporations globally. It's not just a Microsoft thing, it's a large beast, multinationals. I would dare say there's small companies as well. So this cultural shift of how we have relations with each other in a relationship as coworkers, as well as relationship with our customers. And today's customers expect to know most of what they want to do before they even talk to a salesperson, according to some of the most research in the last few years from Gartner and such. In the aspect that we have the internet now, we do have all this information coming to us. And so engaging with a salesperson today is more of a psychological confirmation for most purchases than it is filling out the order form, because we can do that online.
Mm-hmm.
So this relationship based selling is now, I'm talking from 2010 to now, so the last
Mm-hmm.
15 years, been an evolution of going from the transactional to the relationship based. And I would say the first 7 years, those were, I was banging my head against the wall on occasion. How do you coach people? You don't tell them what to do, and you don't mentor. You build a coaching capability where you spur curiosity and get
Mm-hmm.
people to get curious about what are the options and sparking creativity. And so that was a shift, and it was a long slog, but it really paid off in the long run.
Yeah, I watched that transition take place both within yourself and within Microsoft, but it's also just from in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And the big shift that took place was going from a to do type of mentality versus to think. In other words, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to help you learn to think.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a shift that took place. And then the second shift came in. If I'm going to do that, then I have to shift my training, my learning and development from to tell, to telling and shifting it to asking. And because if I'm not asking questions, I'm not causing you to think. If I'm always telling you and there's no ask, then I'm not helping to develop the cognitive skills to be able to respond if I'm not in the room. And
And that transition to asking questions has intense nuance to it, because we can ask questions in a way that are actually detrimental. We can be very much in the interrogation seat when
hmm
we ask questions. So that was part of the learning curve in the culture, was asking open-ended questions, and how you phrase those questions with true curiosity
hmm
versus leading the witness to get them to give you the answer that you want them to give you.
You bet. You bet. I love that. And so, another word that you used in here earlier that I want us to kind of used to kind of wrap up our time together. I should have booked 4 hours. I'm sorry I didn't. Uh, but it had to do with the word clarity, right? Because if you're trying to implement change, you're trying to create an environment where you're dealing with tension. When you're trying to scale, uh, the key aspect of leadership is to bring clarity to situations. What did you experience, the you of the leaders that you were trying to work with? What robbed them from the clarity that they wanted, that they had to learn how to do a better job at?
The clarity they wanted from their teams
From
or
from themselves. I mean,
from
in other
themselves.
maybe the clarity that was needed, the clarity they were trying to uphold or trying to deliver.
Well, first and foremost, are you clear on what you're asking the team to do? Right. And then have you set the right expectations? And then have you validated that you actually set those expectations?
Hmm.
Because what you say is not always what people hear.
Start to stay on that one. Tell the listeners what you're referring to there, because I love that.
Well, if you tell them the expectations, and you and probably in your mind's eye have a certain way that it's going to get done, and but what time, and what's the quality level, and all these different details that we have in our mind's eye because we have expectations. If we have not communicated those expectations, had a way to validate that they understood it, and
Hmm.
even if it's simply asking, and I end all my coaching sessions, my clients know this, I'll say to them, what was most useful or valuable for
Hmm.
you today in our discussion? Because I want to hear what the learning was, right? So if a leader is not taking the time, they just give the order and give the direction, the misfires that happen from that, maybe they'll catch it sooner because they have a pulse point check in, but it's what you say is not necessarily what they hear, so validate what they've heard, and is that going to meet your expectations, and if not, try again.
Hmm. Yeah, I love this concept of validation, because I have, matter of fact, you had to do that with me. And the fact I ask you a question, you go, well, Mike, let me see if I understand what your question is. And I went, no, that's not the question. This is the question.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I do this all day long. And so, but that's just a perfect example of, as leaders, we think that we are clear, but if we don't create value in asking for feedback on what somebody has just heard and understood, and clarity on the steps, the results, time frames, and get that on the table, the people will walk out of the room one of two ways. One is frustrated because they didn't verbalize the fact they didn't know, or more importantly, I think they're going to run down with their definition, and then you're going to have to go over there and clean up messes, or go back in with a long lasso and try to bring them back into the corral and say, you're going that way, but I wanted you over here, and causes it makes things ineffective.
And again, how you do that validation is critical, right? Because if I said to
Hmm.
you, did you hear what I just said? Repeat it
Hmm.
back to me because I want to make sure you got it.
That's right.
I mean, that's offensive,
Very much so,
right?
especially with what you just said. I want to make sure that you got it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's about them. It's not about you. All right. And that's what you're saying as a leader. You got to make sure it's not about them. It's about your ability and the way that they process what they said. I think that's very, very important. And so, um, the, it's, the last question I want to ask has to do with empathy and authority.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reason the people ask me, how do you select guests for your show? And I went, yeah, it's a pretty simple process. I look for people who have high intellectual thought in their content, but they lead, and they interact with people with their hearts. Because I think that when we connect heart to heart, that's whenever we can release energy, we can release power, we can scale organizations. And that's where you move from compliance to commitment. And if you look at what advice would you give to a leader who has to go through this balance of authority, right, with empathy? Where does the conflict come into there? And what do I do about it?
Well, first and foremost, the conflict comes from not trusting our guts, right? We actually, science shows us we have three brains. We have our thinking brain, which is where we're making most of our decisions. We have our heart brain, which there's tons of neurons, and it actually, the heart, physically, the heart brain sends more messages to our thinking brain than the thinking brain sends to the heart brain. And then you have your gut brain, which again is sending messages all along your vagus nervous system. And your emotions are being controlled in your gut and your heart area, right?
Ooh.
So if you're only thinking and not evaluating how you're feeling, and thus also how the other person might be feeling,
Mhm.
and adjusting your behavior in a way that they can move forward with some empathy and compassion. That doesn't mean giving them the free pass or not engaging. This is that courageous conversation where you understand the emotions and perspectives of how you're going into the discussion, as well as how your educated guess. We don't know 100% until we enter the engagement, but how might they be feeling? How might they be perceived? And what is their emotional charge to the topic, especially if it's one of change? That is all necessary for us to think through. And it sounds like this drawn out process, but it really can just be done in moments. We're going, yeah, I'm not feeling really great about this, but it's a conversation we need to have. I'm going to go in there and give myself a little empathy and grace. And I'm also going to be just as curious as I can be to help move them forward.
Yeah,
And when we
I think,
just show up naturally that way, folks will respond.
yeah, I can't think of a better way to put a cap on this thing is that uh, you, and when we were talking before in this conversation, the word curious has come up as that, and I think that what I'm hearing you say is curiosity is one of the strongest muscles that a leader needs to develop if they really want to have the impact and the authority that they would like to have in leading the teams to the results that the companies need them to.
100%. I will often ask my clients, evaluate it in three categories. Is it a known fact? So be it. Is it an educated guess? Go get more information. Is it an assumption or a wild guess? Start asking even more questions. And that's where curiosity can be fostered.
Love it. That's super. Andrew, thank you so much for your time. This has been delightful. We're going to drop your LinkedIn link if anybody wants to connect up with you later on. Is there any way else that you'd like for people to be able to reach out to you?
The best way to keep up on the work that I'm doing is on LinkedIn. You can also reach out to me at a3culturelab.com.
Super. All right. Well, just thank you so much for your time and your grace. I think that if you look at this um, discussion that we've had on the power of emotional intelligence and being an empathetic leader, is really is if somebody embraces that and strengthens their muscles, they can shake the world just like Microsoft did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us today on Lighting the Path, Strategies for Tomorrow's Leaders. If anything in this podcast speaks to you, if I've challenged you, or if you want to spend time digging into this subject a little deeper, or if you disagree with me, reach out. My contact information is on our website, lightingthepath.net, or email me at mike@mikelejeune.com. Also, look for me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect our networks. Keep lighting the path for those who choose to follow you. It's more than a responsibility. It's an honor.